The European Commission survived a no-confidence vote that has just been voted here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. 175 members of the Parliament voted in favor of the motion of censure, while 360 voted against and 18 abstained. The motion of censure was well below the votes needed, the threshold needed to be successful, which was 2/3 of the votes cast. Representing at least the majority of the total number of the MEPs. So 360 votes were needed to topple the Commission. But most of the political groups of the European Parliament backed the Commission by rejecting this motion of censure. Of course, the European People's Party voted unanimously against, but also the Socialists and Democrats, Renew Europe, and the Greens voted against, even with some abstentions. The far-right groups, Patriots for Europe and the Europe of Sovereign Nations, as well as large part of the European Conservatives and Reformists and some delegation of the left, voted against the Commission, so in favor of the motion of censure. So for the moment, Ursula von der Leyen, which was not present in the hemicycle during the vote, is safe. But the vote and the debate previous to the vote has left some doubts about the support for her agenda here in the Parliament. Vincenzo Genovese, Euronews, Strasbourg.
European leaders on Thursday urged private businesses and equity to invest in rebuilding Ukraine now as they opened an annual recovery conference on Ukraine in Italy. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky kicked off the proceedings in Rome with announcements of a new equity fund and public-private partnerships. According to Meloni, the conference is expected to finalize individual deals of guarantees and grants to unlock more than 10 billion euros in investments.
The two-day conference, which begins today in Rome, which has been organized both by Italy and Ukraine, is the fourth Ukraine's recovery conference. The aim of the summit is to continue the global push for investment to support Ukraine's reconstruction 3 years since Russia's full-scale war of aggression began. The conference includes a series of high-level political events and panel discussions on how business, policy, international cooperation can contribute to a sustainable recovery. According to the World Bank, the recovery and reconstruction will cost $524 billion over the next 10 years. Around 3,500 people are taking part in the event. A significant number of world leaders are also attending, including, besides Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Ukrainian President Zelensky, EU Commission President von der Leyen, German Chancellor Merz. The US is represented by its convoy for Russia and Ukraine, Kellogg. Now, more than 2,000 companies are also joining the conference, including representatives from civil society. Now, the timing of the conference is extremely crucial as the fighting continues in Ukraine and the diplomatic efforts to end the conflict remained stalled. And Ukraine faces the dual challenge of rebuilding its infrastructure while implementing reforms aligned with EU values on its path toward European Union accession. Giorgio Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
At least 2 people were killed on Thursday and 16 others injured after Russia attacked Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, with another mass missile and drone attack. According to Ukrainian officials, the overnight attack reportedly caused fires across the city and came a day after the heaviest aerial attack of the 3-year war so far. Rescue workers worked on Thursday at a residential district in Kyiv after falling debris caused a fire on the top floor of an apartment building, according to Ukrainian officials. Russia had fired more than 700 attack and decoy drones at Ukraine, topping previous nightly barrages for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Many residents in the Ukrainian capital sought refuge in underground metro stations. The attack comes as the Trump administration resumed sending some weapons to Ukraine. The Pentagon had previously directed that weapons shipments be paused. Russia's military has not commented on the reported latest attack.
The UK and France are reportedly in talks to announce a one-in, one-out migration deal, which would see the UK taking in some asylum seekers while sending others back to France. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer are discussing details of how to clamp down on illegal immigration across the Channel, which both call a priority. The UK has previously pressured France to change its approach and laws, including giving police officers more power to arrest migrants afloat.
We all agree the situation in the Channel cannot go on as it is. So we're bringing new tactics into play and a new level of intent to tackle illegal migration and break the business model of the criminal gangs.
The details of the agreement, which could reportedly involve the UK giving France funding to cover the costs of boats, police officers and drones, are still unclear. The deal's announcement is set to take place at the end of the first three-day state visit by an EU head of state since Brexit.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev are meeting this Thursday in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, to discuss next steps in finalizing the peace agreement their offices have confirmed. This is the first formal bilateral meeting of the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan since they agreed on the draft text of a peace deal following almost 4 decades of conflict.
This is particularly important because it's a bilateral summit. With Russia overwhelmed by its failed invasion of Ukraine, this is very much at the exclusion of Russia.
In September 2023, Azerbaijan reclaimed full control of the Karabakh region after a lightning military campaign, following decades-long conflict with Armenia in which Russia was a central actor.
Azerbaijan's launch of a war in 2020 and its military seizure of Nagorno-Karabakh has exposed the emptiness of a security reliance on Russia. But I would also say Armenia and Azerbaijan, ironically, share a same pursuit, a policy to defy Moscow, pushing back and pushing out Russia from the South Caucasus. A significant lesson learned from the Ukrainian battlefield is the surprising weakness and incompetence of the Russian armed forces. That's an important lesson for all of the countries in the near abroad, Russia's neighbors.
Analysts believe Moscow losing its influence in the region will leave a dangerous vacuum of power which Turkey is seeking to regain.
The European Parliament approved one of the toughest documents in the history of its enlargement. It's the progress report on Georgia's accession process to the bloc. With 490 votes in favour and 147 against, MEPs condemned what they call the backsliding of the rule of law and the growing Russian influence on the ruling party Georgian Dream. Euronews spoke to one of the main drafters of the report.
We see rigged elections last year in the parliamentary elections, and since then we've seen ever more brutal clampdown and crackdowns on peaceful protesters. So what this report clearly shows is that the Georgian Dream government seems to be playing out the Russian playbook of disinformation, manipulation and intimidation, and that is really not going towards the membership of the European Union.
The Parliament has repeatedly denounced what they call electoral fraud in last October's legislative elections against the opposition party, composed of pro-European forces. The EU and Council of Europe have repeatedly condemned the arrest of dozens, including members of the Georgian opposition, journalists and activists in recent months.
A return to the EU path could only be considered if the Georgian authorities take credible steps to reverse democratic backsliding, meaning stopping the violence against citizens, releasing all those unjustly detained, suspending repressive laws and engaging in a meaningful dialogue with civil society.
Nevertheless, the Georgian government claims its full commitment to the EU accession process, which was reiterated to Euronews last May.
You know, there are many speculations about our accession path, but there is no real shift in our policy. We have the only policy which is the integration agenda. That's formally adopted by the government.
Growing concerns and disagreements between the EU and the Georgian government prompted the two sides to freeze the enlargement process, only a few months after Georgia received candidate status for EU membership.
A lot of hate.
US President Donald Trump said that he would impose 50% tariffs on Brazilian imports, citing a witch hunt trial against former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is accused of trying to overturn his 2022 election defeat. He faces charges including involvement in an armed criminal organization and attempting to undermine Brazil's democratic order. In a letter addressed to current President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Trump said the trial shouldn't be happening and called for it to end immediately. Lula responded that the 50% tariffs would trigger Brazil's economic reciprocity law, potentially suspending trade, investment and intellectual property agreements with the US. Lula also noted that the US has maintained a trade surplus of more than $410 billion with Brazil over the past 15 years. Bolsonaro has not commented on Trump's announcement, but he has previously said he is the victim of political persecution.